Why don't you leave the business talk to people who actually understand it, sweetheart? Her tone was soft, too soft, the kind of tone people use when they want to humiliate you politely. Laughter rippled across the long oak table, blending with the clinking of wine glasses and the faint hum of jazz playing from the corner speaker. I stood there, in my own dining room in Westport, Connecticut, clutching my printed proposal like a fool who didn't know when to stop dreaming. It was supposed to be a family strategy dinner, informal, just ideas. That's what my husband said when he invited me to join his mother, his brother, and the two longtime board members of their family-owned furniture company, Holloway Home and Design. But clearly, the only idea they wanted from me was silence. I had spent weeks working on that plan, a digital expansion proposal that could bring their aging, brick-and-mortar brand into the modern world. I had numbers, market research, projections, everything. I wasn't some clueless wife. I had a degree in business management and a decade of experience running operations quietly behind the scenes. Still, the laughter kept echoing. My husband, Michael, leaned back in his chair, wine swirling lazily in his glass. "Come on, Mom," he said with a grin. "She means well, but e-commerce, social media marketing, that's not really her lane. She's great at people management. Let's not overcomplicate things." The men at the table chuckled. And then the woman who'd spent years reminding me that I married up. My mother-in-law, Judith Holloway, folded her hands and looked at me the way people look at a child who's wandered into a boardroom. "Emma," she said, "some of us just aren't built for risk. You've got a good heart, but you need to understand your role. You're part of this family, not its leadership. You don't have to prove anything." I smiled faintly because crying would have been worse, but my throat burned. My face felt hot. My chest tightened as I forced out a small laugh. "I see," I managed. "So it's safer to keep doing things the way you always have." Judith tilted her head, feigning patience. "Darling, that's how this family's stayed successful for 70 years. Consistency. We don't need fancy apps or online nonsense." "Online nonsense," I repeated softly. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel every eye on me waiting for me to shrink, and I did outwardly. I nodded, gathered my notes, and muttered something polite about good points. But inside, something sharp and cold snapped into place. I looked at my husband, the man who once told me he admired my ambition, and all I saw was a boy still living in his mother's shadow. He couldn't even look at me directly, so I did what they didn't expect. I smiled. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, my voice calm. "I think I finally understand what I need to do." Judith smiled back, thinking she'd put me in my place. "That's the spirit," she said, raising her glass, "to families staying strong and knowing their limits." They toasted, laughed again, and I walked away out of that dining room, down the hallway lined with expensive oil paintings and into the quiet night air. The Connecticut breeze was cold, but it felt cleansing. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was clear. Because standing there under the soft porch light, I made myself a quiet promise, the kind you don't say out loud because it burns too deep to waste on words. One day, they'll wish they'd listened. One day, they'll remember this dinner and choke on that laughter. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I slept well. The laughter still echoed in my head long after I left that dining room. It followed me down the long hallway of our house, that expensive, picture-perfect house in suburban Connecticut that suddenly felt like a museum of other people's dreams. I went straight to the guest room. It used to be my art space before my mother-in-law suggested it would make a lovely storage area. Funny, everything I loved somehow always became lovely storage after I married Michael. I dropped the proposal folder on the table, the same folder I had held like a trophy just hours ago. The words e-commerce expansion plan stared back at me, now a reminder of how naive I must have looked. I sat there for a while, staring out the window. The neighborhood was quiet, perfect lawns, symmetrical mailboxes, golden sunset bleeding into the sky. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me something had cracked open. When Michael came in later, he didn't knock. He just leaned on the doorframe, phone in hand, still smiling like the world revolved around him. "Hey, don't take it personally," he said. "Mom can be blunt sometimes. She just wants what's best for the company." "The company or for you?" I asked, not looking up. He sighed. "Same thing, babe. You married into this, remember?" That line hit me harder than the laughter. He walked away, probably thinking the conversation was over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning. That night, I opened my laptop again, not to fix the proposal, but to start a new one for myself. No more begging for a seat at their table. I'd build my own. In the following weeks, I moved differently. To Michael, I was recovering. To his family, I was behaving. But in truth, I was plotting, quietly, smartly, and with a smile that fooled everyone. Every morning after Michael left for work, I'd brew coffee, open my laptop, and dive deep into what I knew best, people. I'd always had an eye for taste, color, design, emotion. While they laughed about women's intuition, I was studying data, reading case studies on digital branding, and watching how small businesses went viral online. I joined Facebook groups of women entrepreneurs, watched free webinars, and built connections quietly. By the third week, I knew exactly what I wanted to do: start a digital home decor brand. Nothing fancy, just handmade pieces, minimalist designs, items that told stories. I'd call it Ever and Eden, a brand for people who wanted beauty with meaning, not just luxury for show. I started small, one Etsy store, one Instagram page, one email list. But I worked like a woman possessed. While Michael thought I was redecorating, I was designing product prototypes. While his mother thought I was resting, I was building supplier relationships in China and Mexico. And while they laughed over dinner, I smiled along, already knowing my time was coming. 3 months later, the first order came in, $79.99. It wasn't much, but it felt like a heartbeat, proof that I was alive again. The product was a handmade ceramic vase I had designed myself, inspired by a watercolor pattern I'd painted years ago. I wrapped it carefully in brown paper, added a handwritten thank you note, and shipped it out with trembling hands. By the end of the month, I had 28 more orders. The house felt different. My energy was different. Even Michael noticed. "You seem busy lately," he said one morning over breakfast. "Just a few things here and there," I replied, pretending to scroll through Pinterest. He smiled, completely unaware that his wife, the one he told to stay in her lane, had quietly built a profitable side business from the same lane he mocked. At night, I'd watch sales roll in while he slept beside me. The soft glow of my laptop became my silent revenge, a symbol of every time I'd been underestimated. But success changes people, and I was beginning to change too. It started with small things. Michael began asking why I wasn't at his company's events anymore. His mother started commenting on how distracted I seemed. Even his brother, Mark, the family's golden child, joked one evening, "Be careful, Michael, your wife might be planning a takeover." They laughed, but this time I didn't flinch because they were half right. Ever and Eden was growing faster than I could keep up. I had partnered with 2 online influencers who loved my brand's aesthetic, and overnight our following tripled. Orders came in from all over the country: California, Texas, New York. Michael noticed I'd been staying up late, and one night he asked, "What exactly are you working on?" I smiled and said, "Just something for myself." He didn't like that answer. Control had always been his love language. The idea of me thriving without his permission unsettled him in ways he couldn't express. One evening, he opened my laptop while I was in the shower. When I came out, the screen was open to my Etsy dashboard with sales numbers blinking across it. He looked at me, eyes narrowed. "What the hell is this?" I stood there, towel wrapped around me, water dripping onto the hardwood floor. "My business," I said simply. He scoffed. "Your business, using my Wi-Fi, my house, and my time." That night I realized he wasn't threatened by what I built. He was threatened by who I was becoming. And that's when I knew, if he wanted war, he just declared it. The silence between us that night was thicker than the air in the room. Michael stood by the window, his face half lit by the dim bedside lamp. He looked more annoyed than shocked, like I'd broken a rule he thought I understood. "So you've been running a business behind my back?" He asked, his voice calm but sharp. I folded my arms, meeting his eyes. "No, I've been running my business. There's a difference." He laughed dryly, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. You think selling a few vases online makes you a CEO?" "It makes me independent," I said. That word landed like a slap. He turned, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous, Emma. You're my wife. We make decisions together." I tilted my head slightly. "No, Michael, you make decisions and I agree, or I get laughed out of the room." For a second, he had no words, just that blank, tight-lipped stare that men give when their authority is being questioned. Then he muttered, "You're overreacting," grabbed his phone and walked out. The door slammed. I stood there alone, the faint sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. But I didn't cry this time. I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of losing him. He was afraid of losing control. Within days, the tension in the house became unbearable. Michael wasn't talking to me, not really. He'd answer questions with clipped replies, eat dinner in silence, and leave early for work. Then the whispers began. His mother started calling more often. "I heard you've been experimenting online," she said one afternoon, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's sweet that you're keeping busy, but darling, hobbies shouldn't distract from your home." I smiled into the phone. "You're right, Mrs. Holloway, it's not a hobby, it's a company." A pause, then a sharp exhale. "You're becoming arrogant, Emma. Michael doesn't need a competitor in his own house." That line told me everything I needed to know. Michael had already told her. By the weekend, I could feel it, the subtle shift in how they treated me. At the family brunch, his brother made jokes about Etsy, and his mother mentioned that some people mistake busyness for purpose. They thought I'd shrink. But I didn't. I listened, smiled, and watched, because now I knew I wasn't just fighting for my business. I was fighting for my dignity. That night, I called my closest friend, Harper, a lawyer and one of the few people who'd seen me before I became Mrs. Holloway. "You're building something real," she said firmly. "Don't let them gaslight you into thinking it's small. They're scared." I looked around my studio, rows of vases, candles, textiles, all hand-packed, labeled, and ready for shipping. She was right, they were scared. And fear has a funny way of turning powerful people into fools. 2 weeks later, I came home to find my studio empty. The shelves were bare. The boxes, the orders, the inventory, all gone. For a moment, I thought I'd been robbed. Then I saw the note taped to my work table in Michael's handwriting. "Emma, I've had the cleaners clear out your supplies. We can't have our home turned into a warehouse. If you want to keep playing business, rent a space somewhere else. M." I just stood there, gripping that note until my hand shook. He didn't even ask, didn't talk to me, he just took it all. Something in me snapped. When he got home that night, I was waiting in the kitchen. The note was on the counter. "You touched my work," I said quietly. He sighed. "Emma, I'm protecting our space. You're becoming obsessive." "No, Michael," I said, stepping closer. "You're becoming afraid." He froze. I could see it in his eyes, the mixture of guilt and ego, pride and panic. "Do you hear yourself?" he said finally. "You're losing it." "No," I whispered. "I'm finding myself." Then I walked past him, grabbed my car keys, and left. I didn't even know where I was going. I just drove until the city lights blurred and the tears finally came. That night, I stayed at Harper's apartment. And while I cried into a throw pillow, she said the one thing that would change everything. "Maybe it's time you stopped asking for space and started taking it." The next morning, I rented a small studio downtown, a dusty, old space above a coffee shop that smelled like roasted beans and paint thinner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought secondhand shelves, repainted them white, and reopened Ever and Eden from that room with nothing but 3 vases and a laptop. It felt like starting from scratch, but this time I wasn't scared. I was free. Orders trickled back in slowly. I shared my story, not the personal parts, but enough to make people root for me. "Built from my living room, reborn in a small studio." That was the tagline I added under my brand's name. Something about it resonated. Customers began tagging us on social media. Influencers picked up our pieces again. And by the end of that month, I'd made more than my old corporate salary. One night, Harper and I sat on the studio floor, surrounded by boxes and laughter. "You realize you're doing this without him, right?" she said. "Yeah," I smiled. "And that's exactly why it feels so damn good." But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about justice. And justice, when served cold, takes time. Michael showed up at the studio 2 weeks later. He looked out of place in his tailored suit, standing in a room filled with clay, packaging tape, and creativity. "I see you've settled in," he said, scanning the shelves. "I have," I replied, not looking up from my order list. "I'm glad. I didn't want things to get ugly." I laughed softly. "Ugly? Michael, that ship sailed when you threw out my work." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Emma, you're clearly good at this. I was just trying to protect what we built together." "You mean what you built for yourself," I corrected. "I was never part of that." He hesitated for once, unsure of what to say. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. "You've changed." I finally looked at him. "No, Michael, I just stopped apologizing." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned toward the door. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. "Don't forget who helped you get here." I smiled. "Oh, trust me, I never will." Because that was the day I realized something powerful. He might have started my story with humiliation, but I would end it with power. And I wasn't done yet. The morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows of my studio, glinting off glass jars and clay bowls. My little empire in progress. I was sealing a shipment when Harper burst through the door, holding her phone. "Don't freak out," she said, grinning, but you're on Modern Makers Weekly. I blinked. I'm what? She handed me the phone. There it was, an article titled, Meet the Woman Who Rebuilt Her Business After Losing Everything. They'd featured Ever and Eden in their Resilience Entrepreneurs section, highlighting my comeback story and unique craftsmanship. No sob story, no pity, just respect. The comments were full of encouragement, and one line caught my eye. She's proof that grace and grit can outlast arrogance. I didn't need to guess who that arrogance referred to. By evening, our website had crashed from traffic. Orders poured in from across the country. That night, as I packed boxes under the hum of the radio, something clicked inside me, a quiet shift from revenge to realization. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was winning. A week later, Michael called. His tone was oddly polite, rehearsed. Mom's hosting a dinner next Saturday. She'd like you to come. I nearly laughed. Oh, she would she? Look, Emma, he said softly, let's just keep things civil. You've made your point. I didn't answer right away. My point? That I was capable, that I existed. Still, I agreed to go, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. I wanted to see the family that had once mocked me, now forced to sit across from the woman they'd dismissed. The night of the dinner, I wore a simple navy dress, elegant, unpretentious. The moment I walked in, conversation paused for a split second, long enough for me to catch the flicker of surprise on their faces. Ah, Emma, Mrs. Holloway greeted, her smile tight. We've been following your little venture, quite impressive. Little venture, of course, I smiled. Thank you, it's grown faster than expected. We're actually in talks with a few boutique chains. Her eyes widened slightly, a crack in her polished composure. Throughout dinner, Michael's brother asked questions that sounded friendly but carried an edge. So, Emma, how does it feel competing with family now? I sipped my wine. Oh, I don't see it as competition. I serve a different market, one that values authenticity. The table went quiet. Even Michael looked uneasy. As I stood to leave, Mrs. Holloway's voice followed me. You've changed. I turned slightly, meeting her gaze. No, I just stopped letting other people define what I'm capable of. Her fork clinked against her plate. That sound, that tiny, brittle sound, was the first real victory. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Holloway Home and Design. Subject line, proposal for collaboration. I nearly laughed out loud. They wanted to partner with Ever and Eden to merge modern branding with traditional craftsmanship. Translation, they wanted my ideas, the same ones they'd mocked me for. I read the email twice, then called Harper. They want to use your image to save their sinking ship, she said bluntly. Their online division's been bleeding money since you left. Then maybe, I said slowly, it's time I let them think they're saving me. We crafted a carefully worded reply, polite, professional, and deliberately vague. I agreed to a preliminary meeting at their headquarters. When I walked into that gleaming glass building, memories of humiliation flickered in every polished reflection. But I wasn't the same woman who'd walked out of that dining room months ago. Michael looked surprised to see me so composed. You look confident, he said. I am, I replied, offering a cool smile. We discussed figures, contracts, and creative control, but my focus was sharper than ever. This wasn't about joining them. It was about understanding just how desperate they'd become. And from that meeting, I learned something valuable. They weren't trying to partner with me out of goodwill. They were trying to stop a competitor before she outgrew them, which meant one thing: I was already winning the war they hadn't realized had started. The collaboration talk stirred rumors in the local business circle. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who this Emma Holloway was, the woman with a calm smile and a growing empire. I played it cool. I didn't brag, I let the work speak. While Michael's company fumbled with their outdated systems and tone-deaf marketing, Ever and Eden bloomed. We launched a new eco-conscious line, Roots and Revival, featuring handcrafted sustainable home pieces. The name was symbolic. I had found my roots, and I was reviving everything they tried to bury. At the same time, I began receiving invitations to speak at women's entrepreneurship events. The first time I stood on stage, looking at a room full of women taking notes, my voice trembled, not with fear but gratitude. I told them about rejection, about laughter, about being told I wasn't cut out for business. And when I finished, the room erupted in applause. Later that evening, I got a text from Michael. You looked good up there. Guess I was wrong. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. You weren't wrong, you were impatient. Because the truth was, I had always been capable. I just needed to be underestimated first. Spring came with new momentum. Ever and Eden was now featured in Home Living magazine, and we were finalizing deals with 2 major boutique retailers. Meanwhile, whispers from inside Holloway Home and Design told a different story. Declining sales, delayed shipments, client complaints. Their traditional model was crumbling, and Michael's leadership was under scrutiny. Harper looked up from her laptop one evening, smirking. "They're drowning, Emma. You could throw them a lifeline or watch them sink." I thought for a moment. "Neither," I said. "I'll build a bridge, but only if I'm the one who decides who crosses it." So I called Michael. "I've been thinking," I said smoothly. "Maybe our brands could collaborate one last time. You get visibility, I get access to your suppliers. Win-win." He hesitated, clearly wary. "Why now?" "Because business," I said with a faint smile, "is about timing." He agreed to a trial partnership. What he didn't know was that this partnership was the first step in a bigger, slower game, a test of loyalty, patience, and poetic justice. Because when the storm finally broke, it wouldn't destroy me. It would reveal them. 2 months into the collaboration, numbers looked good, too good. Our new co-branded line, the Heritage Collection, was selling fast online, but something felt off. Orders weren't matching invoices. A few clients complained about delays. When I brought it up to Michael, he waved it off. "It's just logistics, Emma, growing pains." Still, something gnawed at me. That night, while reviewing sales data, I noticed duplicate entries in the supplier records, same product IDs, different prices. Someone was padding numbers. The next morning, I called Harper. "Can you run a quiet audit? I think someone's cooking the books." Within a week, she confirmed it. Holloway Home and Design had been inflating costs, skimming profits from our joint line without my knowledge. I wasn't shocked, just disappointed. I confronted Michael one evening at his office. "Do you think I wouldn't notice?" I asked, tossing the printouts on his desk. He didn't flinch. "It's standard practice, Emma. You wouldn't understand corporate structure." I stared at him, quiet and steady. "Funny. You said that same line before everything fell apart last time." He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Don't make this personal." "Oh, Michael," I said calmly, "everything about this is personal." Then I picked up the papers, folded them neatly, and left. Not angry, just aware. Because that's the moment I stopped seeing him as my husband, and started seeing him as competition. By summer, I'd quietly formed a new entity, Eden Collective, separate from any ties to Holloway Home and Design. Every contract, every asset I'd created was legally mine. When their lawyers finally realized what had happened, it was too late. I'd already absorbed their key suppliers, redirected their client base, and built a reputation that made their brand look outdated. The final blow came at the Westport Business Gala, where Ever and Eden won Emerging Brand of the Year. As I stood on that stage, holding the award, I saw Judith's face in the crowd, pale, tight, uncertain. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "This is for everyone who was told they weren't enough. You are. Keep building." The applause was deafening. And as I walked off that stage, I realized I hadn't just outgrown their company. I'd outgrown their limitations. I was free.